Hello and welcome to day 36 of 365 days to racial change. My name is Thomas Nyback. Thank you for sticking around and having this daily dose of racial awareness and empowerment, disillusionment, and all the above as we look at racial issues in America. Really focusing in on how slavery, how that slave culture back 400 years ago impacts the world we live in today and here in America. We are informed by a man named Dr. Claude Anderson. Please YouTube him, look him up. You'll find him and his information at powernomics.com, the Heritage Institute. .org, I think, and there's plenty of other black organizations. Although I want my goal here is to spark awareness, spark a consciousness, a way of thinking about being black, about being white. I don't know who's watching these videos, but I want everybody to watch them. But it's not just exclusively blackness that I'm after. I'm after critical thinking, critical thought, black empowerment and reparations, things like that will be the byproducts of some serious, concerted, unified effort on a lot of fronts to bring some corrective measures to the wrongs done blacks in this country. So having said that, but Dr. Anderson articulates it much better than I can. Other places you can go to interact with a black community is right behind me, hashtag us too, hashtag USTOO, and it's another black community. There's Black Enough. That's a kind of a black Facebook site. BLAGGENUF, I think, is how you spell it. Just once you start typing it in your browser, you'll find that. So, Dr. Claude Anderson, I've read 3 of his books. He's written a couple. He tours the country. He's been involved with presidential campaigns, successful presidential campaigns. Head of education over the state of Florida. The man knows his stuff. He's been around the world. He's talked to many peoples and races about the issues we broach here on 365 Days of Racial Change. So getting back to this is day 36. Some books I'd like you to get or find. Black History Reader was the first book I read of his. 101 Questions You Never Thought to Ask. Black Labor, White Wealth, Search for Power and Economic Justice. That was Dr. Claude Anderson as well. And finally, his book, Powernomics, National Plan to Empower Black America. And a little disclaimer, this work of his is more than a decade old. And but it's still relevant. We still find these issues apparent and very glaring today. It's like America. It's like when I saw my mother. I remember when she tried to cook a lobster, and lobsters, they do things different now, but lobsters don't just die when you put them in the water. They kind of live through that experience, being boiled alive. So I remember my mother wrestling this pot, trying to keep this animal in there till it died. It had to be excruciating. I was a kid, so I didn't really get it. But I know for me to do something like that today would just tear me up, knowing I'm just slowly killing this animal. So anyway, that's what it's. I think that's what the racial issues are like in America. We need to, either kill it off or just let it go on all sides and all fronts. Also, we are in, and we're having story time today. We're going to lighten it up a little bit, and even the chapter we're going to talk about is a little lighthearted. It's still slave tragedy, white power, white entitlement, but with some levity in there. Uncle Tom's Cabin, Harriet Beecher Stowe's book, is what we're outlining today. The notes just kind of outlines what's happening. There's not a whole lot of white master, powerful and vulnerable, slave, black slave stuff in there, because we're just laying the ground, some foundation for Tom preparing to leave. So if you've been following this, there's no strict schedule on when we do Uncle Tom's Cabin. We do everything. We're kind of flying by the seat of our pants. But, the beginning of the story, Tom is mentioned only because this plantation where he lives in Kentucky is where a lot of stuff goes on, and Harriet Beecher Stowe doesn't really get to Tom later. Today's the 4th chapter, so for 3 chapters there's been some other things going on. We met Eliza, we met little Harry, we met another George, Eliza's husband, who's been mistreated by his master, and these Eliza, George, and little Harry. Harry is the little son of Eliza and George. These are lighter-skinned black folks. They're mulatto, quadroon, considered that, and so they're closer to whiteness, but they're still slaves in the American context and all that. So they're those first couple chapters, their situation is introduced, and Eliza is afraid that her little Harry is going to be sold along with this slave trader that has shown up. The slave trader is trying to settle some debts with Mr. Shelby, the master of the plantation. And so we left off in the 3rd chapter. George is very angry. George is very, he's threatening to run away, go up north to Canada. This puts Eliza in even more stress, because she thinks she has heard her master, Mr. Shelby, throwing little Harry into this deal to sell Tom, because if the master sells Harry along with Tom, all the debt is settled, not just partial. If he just sells Tom, he's still going to have some outstanding debt. Nobody wants that, so he doesn't care. He's the master. Okay, so that's the deal, but Eliza's not sure, though, but we're going to get to that. I don't want to be a spoiler if you haven't read the story. But that's where we're at with that situation. Now we come up to Uncle Tom, Tom himself, the character of this book, Harriet's book. And the title is An Evening in Uncle Tom's Cabin. And we approach the cabin. He's got a little patch of greenery out front. He's growing vegetables consistently and things like that. He's married to a black slave named Chloe, and Chloe is she's the stereotype. You saw this if you see the black and white movies and stuff. When there's a slave woman in the house, it's a very robust, full-bodied woman, very large, round face, very dark, very black, and this is the mammy character. And I mentioned before that Harriet Beecher Stowe's book, from this we get a lot of theater, we get a lot of the stereotypes We get blackface. We get um, uh, just a lot of caricatures that prevailed through American history from this work. It was very influential. The number, when it came out, I guess compiled in the mid 1800s, it was the second best-selling book after the Bible. So a lot of people had this book. A lot of plays came from this. A lot of songs and singing and things like that. So it's Aunt Chloe, very large. They have a few children and running around, but it's one of Tom's last nights on the plantation, and Chloe is going to town. Chloe works. She's in the house, in the master's house. She does the cooking and she helps raise Master Shelby's son. Now, Master Shelby's son is also named George. There's a lot of Georges in the book. There's as the cabin is described on the inside, there's a picture of George Washington. So the name George has some prominence, some meaning to Harriet in this book. So Aunt Chloe is responsible for raising little George, and that is the standard, and that lasts, well after slavery. The black woman raised the white children, went distances to white homes to work and all this stuff, and came home and then had to do more work and stuff like that. It was not much different in my home. My mother, she didn't necessarily go raise white children, but she did go to work all day and all that. And my father worked all day as well, but when my father came home, he rested, had a cigarette and beer. My mother was responsible for disciplining the children, cooking the food, getting us back into bed, and preparing us for the next day. So you see black women, you see this constant cycle of black women doing double duty every day of their lives. How they don't snap and just kill the whole families is beyond me. It must be the power of God or something. So that's Aunt Chloe's life, no doubt. It's really sad that black women were subjected just to that. Go take care of somebody else's children. There ain't much left for a black household when the parents are all working and stressed out and all that. There's a lot of dysfunction and pathology. It just opens the door for a lot of negative things in the black family when that kind of stress is going on. And the white folks just get to sit back and reap the rewards of all this free labor. It's incredible when you think about it. But Aunt Chloe, she has the strength. She's relying on God, and she's putting out a great spread. Little Master George is there. Now, Little Master George is not a bad kid, all in all. And Kentucky is not maybe the worst slave state. And it's as the slaves were sold further south, for whatever reason. My guess is as their usage, for behavioral reasons, run away, or if their usage was in question, or their master got into debt, as Mr. Shelby did, they were sold further south. They keep going south. I'm not done the book yet, but I don't see slaves being sold northward, up. Slavery gets worse as you go further south, to be worked to death on a cotton or tobacco plantation. But young Master George, though, he's not a bad kid because he likes to come over and teach, especially in this scene, Uncle Tom to read and write, and he's hard at working on getting Uncle Tom to uh, configure his letters properly on some slates, and he's his habit, Uncle Little George's habit, is to come and share his lessons with the family, and they love it. It's kind of an entertainment. They get a little piece of education on top of that. Um, Kentucky was not as strict, I guess, with reading and writing laws, things like that, and so there were opportunities for the slaves to be educated, to learn, and things like that. We talked about Eliza and her husband George, and George, we know, he had the mind of an engineer, a visionary, and things like that. And he worked in white manufacturing and things like that, and he improved the plant that he worked at. And I'm sure he was probably a skilled reader um, in whatever enterprise they had. He can't you can't be productive when you've got to tell somebody moment by moment how to do stuff and all this stuff. You need them to be able to kind of get information on their own, maybe hand them instructions so that management can go and be more effective somewhere else. So, the reading and writing and things wasn't that restrictive um, there in Kentucky. I'm sure Eliza was well read and could write well under her mistress's umbrella there in that home. So there you got the picture of little George, little Master George, helping Uncle Tom to do some writing. That's going to kind of reassert itself later in the stories. I don't want to be a spoiler there. So they're talking about serving it up, and it's the scene. It's a few pages, just if you can imagine, just friends sitting around having a good time at a dinner party. There's stories told, and they're laughing and they're joking with each other. They're roasting each other, things like that. It's a good time. You've got this one little white boy is perfectly safe. The they're like I said, it's Kentucky, so it's more northern. So the slave master relationship isn't uh, it isn't inundated, woven with the brutality that we might associate with states further south, like a Georgia or South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi. Not some of the cruel slavery and the whippings and things like that. At least Harriet's book does not portray Kentucky as a state that's so polarized in its white privilege and its white entitlement. Right? Um, and let's just pause again and see, do those minds, do those attitudes still prevail here in the 20th century? I can come and go. I go to work, and I'm here alone in my space because I paid for it and all that. But there are consequences, and I still go. My labor is not necessarily my own. I'm not a business owner, and I am not making my own way. I go somewhere and get paid and all that. So I feel the slavery dynamic is still alive and well here in America. Um, Separate beds are mentioned, and in the commentary, in this particular edition I have, it's annotated as well. It goes on a lot on about sexuality, but in this instance, right here in the 4th chapter, it mentions 2 beds in Uncle Tom's cabin, and Tom has, they have, I guess, their proper bed that they sleep in, but then Harriet says, okay, there's another bed over here for use, and the commentaries and introductions talk about how, that was the bed for sex. They had a bed to sleep in, cuddle in, and lovey-dovey, and then there was a bed in which to go to work. Okay, so but that was pretty interesting. Um, well, I don't know. I've always done everything in the same bed. All right. They describe Tom. Tom is, he's a black man, and he's probably got a big barrel chest. He's got strong arms. He's a labor machine. He's in his prime. He's ready to go to work. Yet, in all of this power and all this potential and strength, there's a humility about him and a peace and a calmness and all that. We don't hear any negativity about this. He knows he's being sold. He's been foretold this, and this is what the dinner's for, and all that. Young George is hanging out because this may be the last time they see Uncle Tom. So, but Tom has some humility, no bitterness, no anger, rage. He's not trying to run away. He's not slacking on his work. It's just another day, and tomorrow's just going to be the same day, whether he's heading down south or back out in the fields or whatever. Although Tom was he worked more closely with his master, Mr. Shelby, in the day-to-day operations of the plantation. He was more in the managerial position over the other slaves, but he was respected. He was not brutal or taking advantage of his position and things like that. Being so close to his master wasn't necessarily your typical house nigger type thing. Okay. Tom and Chloe, like I said, he's probably very close and instrumental in raising young George, Mr. Shelby's son. Very involved in that way. And fortunately, they were close. They were in close proximity to the house and all that. So Tom and Chloe's sons could probably hung out with young George as well. There were sure some clear boundaries when young George went to school, or boys probably didn't hang around the house too much unless they were helping their mother in the kitchen and whatnot. But this young George being there in Tom's cabin was just as natural to him as being in his own house. It was more familiar. There was a sense of family. They had that rapport with one another there. So now after dinner finishes up, it's apparently time the rest of the community, the slave community, comes together, and they have songs and singing and prayers, and there's dancing, and it's kind of a celebration, a going away party for Uncle Tom. And Tom, he's going to offer up some prayers. One of Tom's strong points, his strengths, is his prayers. His prayers are noted across the countryside about Tom's prayers and how he prayed. And if you can think about some fervent, if you've been to church and heard a real soulful, emotional, soul-stirring black prayer, man or woman. You know how it, it just takes you home. God is coming nearer in that moment. It's a sacred space from the utterance of this black human being communicating with God. I've heard those prayers many times growing up in my old little church in the sandy town, right? So I know what that sounds like. And so this passion Tom launches into in his prayer, and the whole congregation, we'll call it, this gathering of black slaves along with little white young George, is swept up in the emotion of the moment, and it's very holy, so it's very important. The chapter finishes up with Mr. Shelby and the slave trader finishing their business. They're wrapping up. Because the agreement was Mr. Shelby have these two slaves ready, George and little Harry, to be picked up by the slave trader. And we'll see in a couple days. We'll see what happens in chapter 5 about that. But Mr. Shelby, because I'd mentioned how it's like family, a lot of rapport, a lot of good feelings, and Kentucky is not necessarily the most brutal state. There's proximity to the free North up there. So Mr. Shelby's concerned that he's trying to get some assurances from this slave trader that Tom's going to be sold to a good master, not be put to hard labor, such and such and such. Nobody can make that guarantee. But because of Mr. Shelby's persistence, the slave trader is just exasperated and says, yes, I'll do that. But it's lip service. I don't know. The way it's written is that Mr. Shelby's not convinced that the slave trader is going to go out of his way to accommodate him or Tom. Right? The slave trader is looking for profit. He's flipping houses. He's buy low, sell high, and the circumstances on either side of the equation don't matter. What doesn't matter where Tom's coming from, where he's going to. Profit. Let's have some profit. So that's how chapter 4 wraps up. And like I said, there's not a whole lot of themes that bear on our conversation. It's a good pause, I think, because other places we've come from, where we're going to, are going to bear out some of the specifics of our conversation, and recognizing some of the places where some stereotypes, slave, master, entitlement, vulnerability, submissiveness, power, those big themes are going to be more explicitly stated in later chapters coming up. So thanks for that. That's story time today. And we'll figure we lighten it up a little bit every once in a while. So that was Uncle Tom's Cabin, Chapter 4. I'm Tom Lynn's Back, and this is 365 Days Towards Racial Change. Thank you, and we'll see you again next time.